How precious is your steadfast love, O God. Beautiful words. As I said, it's good to be back. These days we get a lot of information thrown at us, don't we? Some of it troubling, some fascinating, some just plain boring. As we begin a new year, as we seek guidance and inspiration and strength, let's hear some information from our faith. Amid the bombardment of media, TV, print, otherwise, here's what our faith has to say, as heard in Scripture. From 1 Samuel, my pericope that I'm using will go from verse 20, and it goes to verse 26, as you'll see. Little Samuel was ministering before the Lord as a boy, wearing a linen ephod. His mother, Hannah, used to make for him a little robe and take it to him each year when she went up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice. Then the priest Eli would bless Elkanah and his wife Hannah, saying, "May the Lord repay you with children by this woman for the gifts that she made to the Lord." Then they would return to their home. And then skipping to verse 26. The boy Samuel continued to grow both in stature and in favor with the Lord and with the people. Second reading from Luke. Now every year Jesus' parents traveled to Jerusalem for the festival of Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up as usual. When the festival was ended and they started their return, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. But his parents did not know it. Assuming he was in the group of travelers, they went a day's journey. Then they started to look for him among the relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem to search for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understandings and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished, and his mother said to him, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been searching for you with great anxiety." He said to them, "Why were you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my father's house?" But they did not understand what he said to them. Then he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. His mother treasured these things in her heart, and Jesus increased in wisdom and in years and in divine and human favor. Amen. Well, here we are, already the last full week of January. We made it through another holiday season. I hope that, like me, you enjoyed a great Christmas. I went on my usual Christmas diet. Once again, that's a high-protein breakfast, a sensible lunch, and a low-carb dinner. Each meal, of course, followed by a mound of Christmas cookies. Now, I understand the Mahonies are bringing snack today, and there's Christmas cookies among them, and I'm hoping to get one. Oh, well, something to work off in the coming year, right? Such resolutions are common about now. What resolutions did you strike upon this year? Or maybe you're just waiting to collect your cash after hearing that you've been selected by Publishers Clearinghouse as a finalist in their sweepstakes. You got it made. Good luck. Dealing with clutter now is a hot topic for many. Perhaps you made a resolution about that. Just this past week, both the Miami Herald and USA Today had articles on clutter. The Washington Post had recently run an article entitled 5 Spaces That Would Make Your Houses Much Easier for You and Your Family to Live In. And Psychology Today also had an article, Why Your Clutter is Killing You and What to Do About It. Clutter is a hot topic. Many of those articles refer to and talk about the Japanese declutter guru, Marie Kondo, who's written 3 books on this subject, and now will have a Netflix series on decluttering. On NPR, last week's On Point program I listened to was totally focused on dealing with clutter, and it mentioned Marie Kondo many times. It's an interesting topic with a lot of discussion points. For example, major study was conducted with 1,500 people who self-identified as having issues with clutter. Not yet, that's coming. You'll see. Of the 1,500 people, 1,350 were women. Only 150 were men. The USA Today article talks about the apparent gender difference and possible causes. Why do women seem to be bothered more by clutter? And aside from gender, isn't it true that some people just seem to be naturally prone to being more organized and less cluttered? Not that organization and clutter are the same, because they're not. But you get what I'm saying. Some of us are good at dealing with this, and then there's the rest of us. Now, I have to say that to some extent, while those who are more gifted at living a simple, uncluttered lifestyle may have a lot to say and teach those of us who live amid too much clutter. In fact, some of us like a lot of stuff around. I don't know how many hobbies, and I have stuff for every one of those hobbies. For us, a reasonable amount of stuff is not a problem. It's not an issue. It's a comfort, in fact. Now, recent studies have shown that for many people, living in uncluttered environments, though, or living in cluttered environments, leads to increased stress, less peace and calm, and a reduction in what's called life satisfaction. And many older folks, especially, report that their life satisfaction is significantly reduced. This has a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists taking note, thus the article in Psychology Today. And we buy so much stuff. The endless pressure on us to consume has resulted in most of us just having too much. Studies show that the average family spends $5,000 a year on impulse buying, things they do not need. And the average home has about $7,000 worth of items that are never being used. They're just stored somewhere, sitting around. And it's so easy to buy, isn't it? I mean, go on Amazon, one-click shop, it's on your doorstep in 3 days. That is easy. Now, to me, I actually prefer going to a store and seeing other options and, seeing other stuff. But there too, it's so easy to buy. Just flip out the credit card, boom, 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 out you go. Easy. But to get rid of things, whoa. For many people, that is not easy. We worry about the money that we spent on it, and there are the memories and the attachments we've made with these things. One researcher says that the problem is not the abundance, the problem is our attachment to make these things so important to us, we can't part with them. Can't get rid of things. For example, for us parents, how many of us have tens, 20s, hundreds of paintings, drawings, little ceramic figures packed up in boxes somewhere? Do we really need 50 paintings from every child? Wouldn't 10 do, or 5? And how about clothes? Maybe it's okay for a couple of us to have a couple shirts the same color, but 5 or 6? Do we really need 15 pairs of blue socks, the same exact blue? One guru says that contemplating getting rid of something, you should never touch it. Because once you touch or hold it, your sense of touch will re-energize your attachment to this thing, and it'll be a lot more difficult for you to part with it. Another study says that the big problem is decision fatigue when it comes to decluttering, because we're only able to make so many decisions in a day. When I was a Navy pilot, I flew with the crew of the Chief of Naval Operations once, and I talked to his attendant, and he told me how the CNO has many major decisions to make in any day. He can't get up and have to decide what shirt to wear, what shoes to wear, what to eat, all those decisions. By the time he got to work, he'd be wore out. So they make all those decisions for him. He just goes through, and then when he has to make a decision, he's ready. We get tired. Decluttering is one decision after another, after another, after another, and it goes on and on. It takes a long time and many sessions, really, to get anywhere. My wife and I are working on this. It's a long-term event, evidently. Now, if you want more information on it, you can go online. And there's actually, Marie Kondo's not the first to go here. There's an institute, ICD, the Institute for Challenging Disorganization, ICD. Look that up, see what they have to say. Or read Marie Kondo's books, or watch her show. Or talk to your friends. Is this a problem for them? What are they doing about it? So about now you may be thinking, oh, well, this is really interesting, but what in the world does this have to do with our text today? Good question. How can these two Bible stories inform our conversation? We heard from 1 Samuel, a memory when Samuel was a boy. You need to know that for years before Samuel was born, his mother Hannah had not been able to have children. All the doctors told her there was no hope. She would never get pregnant. But she did. Now, she had promised God that if she did have a child, she would dedicate that child to God's service. So little Samuel came into her life, and he was her prize and joy. But she honored her promise. When he was of age, she offered him to the temple to be an apprentice to the priest Eli. Now, you may think this is a bit sad to give up her son, but I assure you this is not what Hannah had in mind at all. Rather, it was a joy that she had been blessed with a child at all, and then was able to do such a thing as offer that child into God's service. It was everything a mother in that time could ever ask for. As each new year came, she looked forward to traveling to visit little Samuel. See how he'd grown. Hear his stories. Be amazed how mature he was getting. She and husband Elkanah were always so proud. And those visits would always end with the old priest Eli blessing them for their journey home. And can you imagine that journey, thinking back to the conversations with Samuel? And when they were home, she immediately began working on the robe for next year's visit. Interesting. She only brought one robe. How many of us would have done a little bit more, like a dozen robes and a box of socks and a stack of undies and a whole wardrobe? Can't give the kid enough, right? Hannah brought one robe because that's what he needed. There was no room for anything else. She kept it simple. And can you imagine what that one robe meant to Samuel? That was the reminder all year long that he was loved and that he and his parents were keeping their promises. We look ahead into a new year, already now 3 weeks old. What about your promises to God? How do you plan to keep them? What were you blessed with last year or in years prior that you had no clue would ever come? And how do you plan to give thanks for those blessings? Or just being alive on this rainy Sunday and in this beautiful place with food in your tummy and clothes on your back. How will you give thanks for that? May we take a hint from Hannah and keep it simple. Like her creating the robe, think about what you will work on this year. Be it an object, or an attitude, or an effort to support those you love, and to assist in the accomplishment of God's good work. How can you demonstrate your love and concern and care to others? Good questions. This morning we also heard the story about the adolescent Jesus. Actually, in the New Testament, this is the only story of Jesus at this age. And again, it involves a family traveling like in the first text. Isn't it amazing how important things seem to happen when we leave the familiar, comfortable, and usually predictable confines of home? Out there, we can see the world and life so differently. We gain a richer, broader perspective on things back here. These two texts have similarities, but also differences. The story of little Samuel is so warm and touching, but the one about Jesus, not so much. Something went wrong there. There's a rub. As we read this text, many good questions come to mind, especially for that young Jesus. Why did he stay behind? Why was he so surprised that his parents were looking for him? Doesn't he know what happens to a parent when they lose a child? I lost our young son Gabriel once in Aventura Mall, a busy mall, and I was mortified. I was a wreck. The mall guards saved me that day. So didn't Jesus realize that his parents would be concerned? Why didn't he tell them his plan? We have a lot of good questions for that lad. I did a Bible study once on this text, and somewhere in the discussions, one woman said, "Had that boy been mine, I would have tanned his hide." Around the table, jaws dropped. You would have spanked Jesus? Yep. Parenting is a difficult job. There's a lot at stake, and we all have feelings, hopes, and fears. One time, our youngest son, Matthew, accompanied me on a quick trip to an electronics store. I was going to exchange something. I was at the counter. I couldn't see exactly what he was doing. He was in the aisle right next to me, but I could see his blonde curls hopping up and down, so he was okay. My exchange took a bit longer than I expected, but finally we got it done, and then I went to collect my son, only to discover that he'd gone to a rack of blank videotapes. Remember those? There was hundreds of them. He removed them all, and he had made a sculpture on the floor with them. Well, I was late, and I was not happy. I was going to lose more time at work. He said something to me about needing to make his art, but I was not ready for his videotape masterpiece. In parenting, we're upholding a promise to the future, but the path is often bumpy and seldom easy. Joseph and Mary would have agreed, eh? They were so shocked and upset when they realized the boy was not with them or their traveling companions. He'd stayed away from them for 3 days on his own, making no attempt to contact them. They had to backtrack with all kinds of fears going on in their heads. They commenced a full search. And then after finding him, they had to begin the journey home all over again. Joseph would have lost 4 more days of work. And Mary maybe didn't arrange to have the pets fed or the plants watered that extra time. Upon finding him, Mary's opening line was, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been looking for you anxiously." Luke, our author, then adds this great little comment. Joseph and Mary did not understand Jesus' explanation about needing to be in the house of God. They had been so worried about him, but he'd been in the temple the whole time, just like little Samuel, serving God. Now, hearing this story and Luke's comments about them not understanding, some of you may be saying, wait a minute. What about the stories we just heard last month about the angels talking to Mary and Joseph and preparing them for the miracle, and then angels singing heavenly choruses of coming of Emmanuel, and then shepherds who heard coming and being with those new parents? And what about the Magi showing up with all those expensive gifts? Now that kind of clutter we don't mind, right? But it seems Mary and Joseph didn't remember any of that. Angels or anything. Shouldn't they have figured that raising this boy was going to be a little bit different? Actually, this story doesn't totally add up. It does create questions. But our writer, Luke, had the integrity to insert it where it needed to go in the story, just as he heard it. Back in the days of the early church, when the stories of Jesus were first being remembered and told and retold, different communities had heard different stories. No one had heard or seen everything Jesus had done, right? How could that be? Because he moved around all over. So the natural thing was that different groups would have different stories. None of them had what you have. You can go home and open up your New Testament and you got it all right there. They didn't have that. Didn't exist then. There were only various parts of that whole story that different communities knew. In his gospel, Luke included the ones his community knew, and he also included stories that he copied from a gospel that is simply known as Q. We've never found that gospel, don't know what it is. But we know it existed because Matthew also copied, in many cases, the same exact stories from Q and included those in his gospel. But Luke is the only gospel writer to include this story about the adolescent Jesus. His community knew that, nobody else knew it. And it's obvious that he crafted it with that story of Samuel in mind because his ends the same exact way. That Jesus continued to grow both in stature and in favor with the Lord and the people. These two stories have a lot in common. They're simple stories without a lot of clutter. They're about lads beginning their ministry. But the main important commonality they share is that they're both about being faithful to God. Little Samuel, his mother and father, were faithful, doing what they were supposed to be doing. He was obedient, just as the supportive parents were obedient, each honoring promises. Now Samuel would grow and continue ministering in God's name for years, doing good things his whole life. In fact, it would be Samuel who one day finds and anoints a young man named David, who would be Israel's greatest king. In the story of young Jesus, he too was faithful, doing what he was supposed to be doing. Now, a major fact here, I don't know if you caught it, was that Jesus was 12 years old. Luke isn't just throwing out the age of this kid here just for the heck of it. That's an important age. In the Jewish culture, when children are 12, 13, that's when they're considered to be spiritual equals, spiritual adults. That's when they are bar or bat mitzvahed and welcomed into the family of a synagogue, into spiritual adulthood. This is important. It tells us that Jesus was at the age when he finally realized he was no longer a child, but he had adult responsibilities. He had a mission to begin. Thinking back on your life, can you remember when you realized you were no longer a child? No longer a kid, but in fact, entering adulthood? I remember that day very clearly. Hit me very hard. It was during the Christmas season. There was a song playing on the radio, you know, the one about Toyland, Toyland, wonderful girl in Boyland. Once you leave its borders, you can never return again. My father sitting there looked right at me and said, well, you're old enough now to know that's true. Wham! It hit me. I was beyond the border, never to return again. Can you remember the day that awareness came to you? Jesus had realized that he was a spiritual equal, that his childhood had ended. He was ready to move into the future, to begin his mission. and he had taken a step in that direction. Mary and Joseph, well, they weren't quite there, were they? They didn't understand what was happening to their son. They were not ready for that. It is a big step for both parent and offspring. Jesus was ready to begin, though, his journey that would take him to places and events that no one then could ever imagine. In our prelude today, we heard a song about when Jesus turned the water into wine at the wedding in Cana. That would be the first of his many miracles. After that, he would perform all kinds of astounding things and would create and offer what he had toward God's mission. As I conclude then, as we begin and move further into this new year, as we work on our resolutions, perhaps thinking about dealing with clutter, we can take these two stories of these two young people to heart. See how they were both focused on the future, not the past. They were focused not on side issues or trivia or the clutter of life, but on the mission God was laying before them. If clutter or another issue is difficult for you, take a hint from our texts. Change your focus. Set your eyes and your mind on the mission God is laying before you in this coming year, and all the rest will fall into place. I think about the disciples that Jesus would one day call. I mean, just think. They were busy fishermen, most of them, trying to earn a living. Their lives were full, cluttered, if you will, with chores and responsibilities and cares and worries and mending the nets and the boats and so on and so on and so on. But when their eyes fell upon Jesus and they heard his words, they focused on the mission that God had just set before them. And they walked away from all that. They knew what they had to do. Let us set our focus on the good work God is setting before each one of us this year, be it visiting or helping the sick or those who are mourning or grieving, sheltering the homeless, clothing those who have few clothes, feeding the hungry, walking with the least, last, or lost. All those things that Jesus taught us that we need to do. We won't need any Christmas cookies, and we won't need to win the Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes either. If we do that, we will be richer by far. Amen. As a way